Music by Tepo Tola. This one is called Shine Your Light at 12 minutes past 2 on SAfm 104 to 107 nationwide. You're tuned into Living Redefined with myself, Sechaba Gqeba. Thursdays, the safe space, all mental health matters. We navigate these very tough conversations, and today we're talking steps towards coping with emotional and psychological trauma after a car accident. We'll be speaking to Nobathembu Peter, who's an accident survivor. We'll also be speaking to Dr. Daniel Den Hollander, who is one of our resident clinical psychologists. I'm going to start with Nobathembu and give you just a brief history about her accident. She was very young and she was basically making her way to church with a group of other children from her neighborhood when a drunk driver drove into her, subsequently leaving her paralyzed, and the driver was then prosecuted. We'll also speak to Dr. Daniel Den Hollander. Accidents vary, come in different shapes and forms, well, motor vehicle accidents, that is. And if you've ever been in one, you know, I couldn't know how severe it is, but I know that even the ones that aren't severe leave a mark, change you, leave you paranoid, leave you rattled. And obviously just tamper with your mental health. So you are more than welcome to get in touch, officially taking your calls. 011-714-2006. I'm taking your SMSs, 41391. They are charged at R1.50. I'm taking your WhatsApp texts as well as voice notes on 061-410-4107. If you're not comfortable calling in, you can just send a voice note. If you are going to do that, or if you want to weigh in on the show, you can keep it to 60 seconds and send it to that number. Nobathembu, good afternoon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
It's good to be back.
Thank you for making the time. So Nobathembu, you are now 28. You were left paralyzed from a very serious accident which involved a drunk driver. Do tell us about this.
Yes. The accident happened when I was 3 years old. So I was very, very young. And the doctor said that the intensity of the injury left me paralyzed for life. So paralyzed from the waist down. Those who know the different levels of injuries, I'm T10. So yeah, basically I can't move my legs at all. I don't have control over my lower body, and therefore I use a wheelchair as a mobility device to get me from one point to another.
So, and thank you for sharing the story with us. So you live with your injuries, you know, you live with the ramifications of this accident, an accident that could have been avoided should the driver not have been drinking and driving. Do you find that because you were so young, were you able to understand emotional trauma? And even if you weren't able to understand it at that stage, you're now 28. What are you feeling in terms of dealing with what happened then, even if you weren't able to wrap your head around it? Is it resentment? Talk to us about this.
I think I'm actually very lucky that it happened at a young age, because I don't know what life was like before, like I don't remember what it feels like to walk, even though sometimes I was like, can't I just feel what it feels like for one day at least, then have the ability to walk, just to feel what it feels like. But then again, I'm like, why do I need to know what it feels like, my life has been perfectly fine the way it has been, even now, I'm like, growing up, I didn't see myself as different from other kids. It's only when my parents started and everyone else started treating me different, like they would be very overprotective, like I can't play certain games, I can't go certain places without parental, support, and all of those things. So, yeah, growing up, it was, I wouldn't say challenging, but I only realized later on in life that, no, man, I'm different from others. I have a disability and I need to always depend on my wheelchair. And if my wheelchair breaks, then I can't go anywhere. I'm stuck in one place, And that was very frustrating, especially like traveling, from work or from school, like public transport is not accessible for people with disabilities. So those are the kind of things, that made me depressed, that made me, feel very bad about being disabled, So I think it's just the world not being accessible to my disability that made me feel like this is too much, or, I need counseling to deal with all the challenges, and all the struggles that comes with living with a disability, And I mean, even dating has been difficult because some guys would be like, I can't deal with having a girl in a wheelchair. Like, no, that's too much for me. That's too much stress, Like, I've been seen as unattractive because of my disability, And it's like you said, it could have been prevented if that guy didn't drink and drive, Like, my life would have been different if that person, didn't drive under the influence of alcohol. And that's why I'm part of the campaign that is, against drinking and driving, So, yeah, I'm trying very hard to make an impact so that other people don't experience what I've experienced, because it's honestly not nice. It hasn't been nice.
You place a very valid point in saying that psychologically, it's more so with, navigating life in your wheelchair now, that you feel like, there's some issues there that are linked to your mental health with regards to the accident, but how, of course, because it happened when you were so young, you weren't able to wrap your head around it. You don't remember life before the accident, or, being able to walk. And it's very interesting. I'd want Dr. Daniel Den Hollander to come in on this and speak about, just what you're dealing with now as a 28-year-old versus what happened when you were 3. But I want to take a quick break. We're going to speak to Dr. Daniel Den Hollander, who is one of our resident clinical psychologists, right here on the Safe Space. We'll be right back after this.
At Sechaba_G and at SAfm Radio on Twitter.
20 minutes after 2, this is Living Redefined with myself, Sechaba Gqeba. You tune to the Safe Space, which is a segment that we have every Thursday. We're talking about coping and navigating life with regards to your emotional or psychological trauma after a car accident. I'm officially taking your calls, 011-714-2006. Your SMS is 41391. Your WhatsApp texts as well as voice notes, 061-410-4107. Yours could be recent. I'm trying to think of an incident that occurred in my life just before we have Dr. Hollander online. It seemed like a very minor incident. Happened about 10 years ago. I was driving on a stretched out road where there was gravel on the sides of the road, and the wheel of the car in front of me just rolled back, smashed into my windscreen, and I then lost control of the car, veered off. Next, I'm on the gravel road. I managed to regain control of the car, and everything was fine. Assistants arrived, my family members arrived. We did what we needed to do, filed police reports, etc., and I moved on. I didn't go to counseling. But I struggled getting back on the road for a good year and a half after that. The paranoia that I experienced about driving made me realize that, even though, I didn't see it as a near-death experience. Yes, when I looked at the windscreen, I saw it. It was completely smashed, and I thought I could have lost my life. But I thought this was not a collision. So because it wasn't a collision, who am I to complain? People are in more severe accidents. And that's why I don't want us to trivialize anything. So officially taking your calls, your SMSs, as well as your WhatsApps. Dr. Hollander, good afternoon. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, and a Happy New Year to you and to the listeners.
Happy New Year to you too. We need to find a place or some sort of consensus about when we stop saying this. But yeah, no, I haven't heard from you in a long time. I did take quite a lengthy break. Thank you for making the time, Dr. Hollander. We're speaking about motor vehicle accidents and the trauma, that one has to deal with, be it psychological, be it emotional. Talk to us about what an individual would be going through after being involved in a car accident.
So I think the simple answer is that it depends on what happens in the car collision. I sometimes have a bit of an issue with calling it an accident because often it's not an accident. We know that a lot of the car collisions that do take place happen as a result of one of the two drivers breaking some law of the road. Can be drinking and driving or speeding. And I think, sometimes the word accident is a bit misleading in that, is that often it's a car collision. But in regards to that, I think there's 3 levels at which psychological damage can occur in a car collision. The first is just in the nature of it. It's a shocking incident to happen, and any human being that goes through an incident like that, we know that the body goes into a heightened state of panic. And in that moment, that heightened state of panic lasts usually until afterwards. Adrenaline kicks in, and later on it starts to subside. It just depends. For some people, it subsides relatively quickly. For other people, it can carry on for months. The second part is that often it involves physical trauma, such as what your brave guest has shared online with us today. But I want to also say that sometimes we miss the neurological impacts that can happen. Sometimes the neurological effects, especially if your head got hurt or you became unconscious as a result of the collision, only often manifests way later. Our understanding around concussions and what we originally thought was something you could just shake off, and now realizing the real damage of it is something that we often take for granted. A lot of the cases where a person has a change in personality or a change in functioning can be rooted back to a neurological impact that we originally didn't see. And then thirdly also is that it involves the threat of loss of life or actual loss of life. And that opens up the whole bereavement and the anger, the frustration, the hurt, and even the guilt, both survivor guilt from ones who survived when somebody didn't survive the tragedy, or in the case of the driver who caused the collision. There's often guilt involved on their behalf as well. So you can see in that one particular incident how it can impact you on so many different levels. And all of these levels, if they are neglected, can start to impair your ability, first of all, to be able to get back into a car again, as you described, Sechaba, in regards to what you just said now, in regards to your trust, in regards to your confidence. But in its most severe forms can actually have quite detrimental effects on your life that require adjustments, that require the environment around you to be able to support you and allow you to have as normal a life as possible through the impacts and consequences of this tragic event.
We've just got a text come through saying that collisions that occur because of errant behaviors should be called negligences and not accidents. And I 100% agree. But let's go back to Nobathembu's situation. You know, Nobathembu spoke about how this happened when she was very young and how she's 28 now. And she says she was fortunate enough to not have been able to understand what had happened at this stage and doesn't remember life before being in her wheelchair. But she's finding that she's having to deal with some of these psychological and emotional issues as a result of her now understanding that her living in this wheelchair has made her live life differently, you know. Yeah. Could you please expand on this?
Yeah, I think that there's two folds there. Hey, there's the one of it, from listening to her, is the one is her own personal journey in that. And the second one, again, is the prejudice. It seems to be like a record player that got hooked on. Is that because we talk about this every time, but it's the prejudice of the people in your environment who don't understand. And what often happens is that the prejudice and the misinformation impacts us in ways where we actually need the support and love and care. And I think on both of those levels, it's important. I think the big word there is adjustments. It's about adjusting to a new life or new limitations, but also often new possibilities. I think if I think back in my psychology learning days at university, it was drilled in us that we don't talk about disabled, we talk about other abled. You're abled in different ways. But the reality also is that you do require, in the situation of your guest, that the environment needs to assist you and to help you, and the environments need to be friendly for it when the physical impact is to the level at which she describes. And often, the unfortunate thing is that the environments that we live in are unforgiving and not set in a way that makes it easy for us. And how sad that is in 2022 that we still seem to be in this environment where we need to still educate people and set the infrastructures in place in order to do so. But it is also true is that there will be areas of life and things that we will then not be able to do or have great difficulty in doing. I want to say the second one because it almost feels every year people are completely surprising us with what is able and what is not able. So I've stopped trying to say what is not possible and what is possible because people just show me wrong all the time. So there is something to be said about that. But yeah, it's a different way of living, and that means that it's different than the norm. And often people are not very good at dealing with situations that are different to the norm, and that's where prejudice comes in and can become quite hurtful.
I want us to speak about whether or not the severity of the accident would kind of speak to the magnitude of trauma that one experienced. We'll talk about that just before, or just after rather, we head through to headlines with Anne Musa. We're in conversation with Nobathembu Peter, who's an accident survivor. We're also speaking to Dr. Daniel Den Hollander, who is our resident clinical psychologist on the safe space, dealing and surviving, or rather dealing with emotional and psychological trauma post a car accident. That takes us to 2:30. It's time for headlines. All right, 31 minutes after 2. This is Living Redefined. We're in the safe space. We're talking, dealing with the trauma, the psychological, emotional trauma after a car accident or subsequent to a car accident. We're in conversation with Nobathembu Peter, who's an accident survivor. We're also in conversation with Dr. Daniel Den Hollander, who is one of our resident clinical psychologists. Taking your calls, 011-714-2006. We're taking your SMSs 41391, as well as your WhatsApp texts and voice note at 061-410-4107. Before I head back to Nobathembu, I just want to read a text that's come through. I witnessed a car accident when I was 17. I'm now 47, where a group of drunken boys lost control of the car and hit a car driving on the other side. 10 people died in total. The image still haunts me till this day. All right, back to you, Nobathembu. Nobathembu, so where are you now with regards to this? And I wanted to ask you earlier, did you seek psychological help? Did you receive counseling?
Because it happened when I was very young. From rehab, I went to a school for kids with disabilities. So I was always surrounded by other people with disabilities and with people who were trained on how to work, and deal with all these different disabilities. So I think being in that environment helped me a lot, in dealing with my disability and also like self-acceptance and all those things. But I wouldn't say like I went for counseling or therapy just to, talk about how it feels to be disabled, That's why I started using social media as a form, of expressing myself, expressing the frustrations that I experience on a daily basis, all the discrimination I face, all these good, negative, positive kind of things. Because, disabilities are not all that bad, And, society has painted this image that being disabled is the worst thing that could happen to someone, like being disabled is a curse, being disabled is not a nice thing, And I'm happy with my disabled body. I'm happy with what it does and allows me to do, As much as I can't move my legs, but I can still move from point A to B, And that has been a great comfort for me, And I've been surrounded by other amazing people with disabilities, and being able to talk about the different struggles and things we experience, because I mean, we all feel different about our disabilities, even though maybe it might be the same, but one still feels different. Because I mean, sometimes I don't like the fact that people take this lightly, the fact that drinking and driving is just okay, it's not okay, and having people have like bad attitudes, and behavior towards this frustrates me a lot, But when it comes to my own disability, I'm happy, man. I'm happy. It's just that people's behavior around like drinking and driving, and people's behavior when it comes to like listening to disabled people,
must be a trigger.
That becomes an issue too. Yes.
All right. Back to you, Dr. Hollander. I mean, we got the text on WhatsApp speaking about an individual who witnessed an accident, I think almost 10 years ago. And they say they haven't been able to get that image out of their mind. There's also another one that's come through. Hi, Sechaba. In April 2017, I was knocked down by a car in Pinetown. I passed out, quickly regained consciousness. I was hospitalized. Almost 5 years later, I still don't remember how the accident exactly happened. My paranoia and fear on the road is at an obsessive level. Could your psychologist recommend any therapy?
I think I first of all just want to say, yes, therapy works really well in regards to these types of traumas as your two messages have described. And a lot of it's got to do with understanding why your mind works the way that it does. We know that, for example, straight after trauma, there's certain things that come into play, like repeatedly reliving the trauma, especially when you're triggered by some aspect of it. There's also the avoidance. A lot of people avoid getting into the car or driving straight after an accident. And if these are not, you get interrupted sleep. It can turn even into a phobia if it's never addressed or never worked with. What happens in therapy is to understand your emotions, to understand your responses, and understand that anger and that frustration that you feel is actually a very important part of you starting to build back trust, either in your own ability in driving or to be able to build trust again into the road around you. Observing the things that you can control, observing the speed at which you drive and making sure you yourself don't drink and drive. And I want to say in regards with that, I can't necessarily go through into the nitty-gritties of what happens in a therapy session, but it's about understanding your body, understanding why you respond in the way that you do. Mm-hmm. And then what often becomes debilitating is when you get stuck. And that's where you need a professional to help and guide you through out of that stuckness into the normal sequence that any human being would go through in order to go back to normality again. I just want to also comment that when your guest described about her need to be on social media and advocacy and the drinking and driving and the anger that she feels there, I think sometimes, we quickly talk about it being a trigger, but I think that sometimes we don't understand what we mean when we say that, because I really want to say that anger is a healthy, justified anger. And the fact that she goes out onto social media and advocates for those rights is a healthy response, because what she is doing there is trying to take back control of the environment by creating a consciousness that people need to take more responsibility for the fact that the consequences of their own behaviors can have a detrimental impact on a human being in a split second. And I want to say, it's very important that when we use the word triggered, we use it in a funny way. We use it almost in a vulnerable way, when in actual fact, that trigger and how she handled it is a sign of strength, because it's saying that this is an anger that needs to exact a behavior change in the environment around her, and I really want to commend her for that. And say, it almost feels a bit like what she's doing on social media is very similar to what can happen in a therapy session as well. It's about expressing, about venting, about bringing behavior changes either in your life or in the environment around you in order to start to bring the change in order to make sure that these events don't happen. That's also something that's very important, is especially when it comes to drunk driving or speeding accidents, that these are 100% preventable. And that really is the disgust of these types of situations, is that these can be prevented. But it requires every member in society in order to be able to be conscious of more than themselves when they drive. And that message also clearly needs to come out in regards to that. I just wanted to make that comment.
Absolutely. And I'm going to head back to Nobathembu. Nobathembu, back to you just before I let you off the line. What would you like to say? I think in hindsight, we can all just hear that you have adjusted to your life very well, perhaps because this happened when you were very young. But, I commend you for obviously just being an advocate in the sense, and also just, understanding that this is your life, this is your situation, and advocating for people who are living with disabilities, regardless of the incidents that led to them having to live with those disabilities. So just before I let you go, Nobathembu, maybe just a word of encouragement, share how, people can survive these incidents and live a fruitful life going forward.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Now I'm totally speechless. But to our listeners, all I would say is, allow yourself to feel what you feel. No one is saying that you need to accept your disability when you're not ready to accept it. You don't need to accept what happened to you when you're not ready to do that, And I mean, processing trauma takes time, It takes time to process everything. And I mean, I'm 29. I'm turning 29 very soon. And sometimes I'm so frustrated, at the fact that my legs can't do certain things, and it takes me back to square one, or step one. So what I'm saying to the viewers is, allow yourself the chance or the time to process things the way you understand them, or the way you want to process them. And as long as it's not harmful to you and to others, then do it. If it's going to help you move forward in life, then go for it, And I mean, what I'm doing at the moment is working perfectly fine for me, because I'm learning to love my disabled body for what it can and cannot do for me, And someone else would be like, are you crazy for loving a disabled body? Why not, So we're all at different levels when it comes to how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our traumas and the things that happen to us. And yeah, people must stop drinking and driving. Stay at home, get an Uber, ask someone to drive you around if you have to, but don't drink and drive, because you're putting someone else's life at risk and your own life as well. So yeah, that is my message.
All right, Nobathembu, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and thank you for making the time. All right, back to you, Dr. Hollander. I want us to quickly play a voice note, and then we'll be right back to continue the conversation.
Hi, Sechaba. I'm Nobathembu. I was involved in a car accident on the day when Lebuma Tosa passed on. I can't remember the date, but I remember she also passed on with a car crash. And since that day, that year, I'm still afraid of a fast-moving car. Also, what I want to ask is there a way that passengers can be in control or take some sort of responsibility when the driver of a taxi drives very fast and overtakes and break all the rules while we're in the car? Because a lot of the times I'm the passenger who always talks too much and screams at the driver, because I feel like the drivers don't respect us. They run fast while the passengers are in the car. They're in a hurry while we're not in a hurry, but they're servicing us. Thank you, Sechaba.
That's a tricky one. It's basically being in that position where you're in control, but you're not really in control of the situation. Dr. Hollander, back to you. Let's reflect on some of these. I want to speak about the trauma more in depth. If it's a small accident or one that's not too severe versus a severe accident, what are the levels of trauma that one encounters and experiences?
Yeah, these are factors. That's an important factor that you mentioned. I want to say there's a few more that we can add to that as well. For example, if it's the first time that you've gone through something like this, or if there's been many, and if there's been many, sometimes even though it feels like it's a small, like a fender bender, but in your understanding, that's enough to make it big. I think it's not important objectively to be able to say, okay, what now qualifies a big trauma, what now qualifies not a big trauma. I don't think it works like that, especially with our brains and our minds. I think it's the other way around. It's look at your own responses. I think we need to stop now with this idea that Superman is somebody who doesn't respond to anything. We need to discard this nonsense. It's okay that if you have a cut on your hand, you bleed. It's okay that if you suffer some sort of trauma, you're going to have a response. I think we just need to purely normalize that. And the things to watch out for is things like mood swings, loss of spontaneity, no interest in social events or human contact, high levels of stress and anxiety, interrupted sleep, avoidance behavior, being scared to go into a car. Now, I'm not saying that you can't get better with these things without a psychologist, but I'm just saying it works much better and much quicker when you're with a professional. It's the same as like if you've got an infection in your thumb, you don't have to go to a doctor, but it's probably a good idea to do so. And in this case as well, it's a better idea to go and seek somebody who can help you in regards with these things so that you can return back to normal life. Because if you don't, that's when you start to neglect your own mental health. That's where these things can start to develop into post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, turn into a phobia. You start having relationship problems. You start having work conflicts, and you start to have a difficulty in functioning in everyday life. So it's really about watching your own body and your own system of being and your own emotional well-being. And if you notice big fluctuations, just go and get help. It will help you out in the long term. And 1 or 2 sessions just to screen, just to know that you're okay, is better, and if I may say, more cost efficient than if you are suddenly in a situation where you can't function at all.
I also think one thing that we need to take note of is emotional trauma doesn't present itself visually. And that's why I relayed my story initially, that you think you're fine. I don't know if it's because of the adrenaline initially, but I'm thinking, is it necessary for someone to then immediately seek counseling? Or would you advise they internalize the situation, receive support from loved ones before then going on for the trauma counseling?
So one of the cool things about human beings is that our bodies don't lie to us. So the biggest indication always is your own body. And especially in regards to the routines that we do every day. So 5 questions I always ask every single patient that comes into the door is, are you sleeping okay? Are you eating okay? Is your energy levels up and down? Your bowel movements, your menstrual, and also your libido, your sex drive. And if those normal routines fluctuate out of control for more than 3 or 4 days, then you know something's up with your system. Then seek help. So I want to say, no, it's not always necessary. Sometimes it's not a bad idea, but it's not always necessary. But if your system is communicating to you, hey, there's something not going right, then you need to be sensitive to your system and then seek care immediately.
All right. Dr. Hollander, thank you so much for making the time with us always. In closing, just for anyone, I think regardless of what is leading them to experience trauma, what would your advice be in closing?
I think to know that you're not alone. And with all trauma, it always comes back to the same thing. Trauma is about trust, trusting your environment, trusting yourself. So in these types of situations, often where the strength comes in is either in that beautiful demonstration of self-agency and self-strength that was given to us by your guest. The other way is often the cure for trauma is togetherness. Seek your connections with your family, seek your connections with your loved ones, and build the trust back in there. And be kind to each other and be kind to yourselves. It feels like we say the same thing every week, but it really comes down to that. I think that's why Ubuntu is so strong, and we need to be more in that way. It really does cover a multitude of mental difficulties and mental conditions.
All right, Dr. Hollander, thank you for making the time and engaging us this afternoon.
My absolute pleasure.
All right. It's come to that time of the show where we profile another industry leader. That's all coming up next.